In this video, we're going to talk about render in Blender or the rendering process. And we're going to do some really practical examples. For example, this one here is an exterior render, but I also want to talk about rendering a single object and interior rendering. So in my opinion, you always have these three situations, one way or another. So these are kind of the main three categories of render that you would probably do. Now, you can also make some researches yourself, and I've searched here in Google rendering object. So this is the first category. In this case, you are rendering a single object inside a pretty simple scene because you want to concentrate on that particular object or subject. So for example, if you need to do some industrial design visualization, you want to show your product or the product of your client, or perhaps a logo, or well, whatever it's, a single element, a single subject into your scene. Well, in that case, I think I would call that an object rendering. So it's gonna be something real simple and real quick sometimes. And well, I probably would only use here an HDRI image to illuminate everything and have nice reflections and speed up all the process. Now, I also will suggest you some other software. For example, for this particular case, I would go for Keyshot. Now, Keyshot is based on this logic. So you only have one single object. You already have HDRI system with a lighting system, real simple, and you have simple materials. Everything is so simple, so fast, and you can get some really nice renderings within minutes. And then you have the second possibility. This one, I've called this one exterior rendering or rendering exteriors. So in this case, well, things get just a little bit more complex because in these cases, you probably want to add a sky and a sun. So you're going to start to use lights to simulate the sunlight and the environmental light of your scene. And also probably you would add some other artificial lights for the if it's a building, if it's a night scene, you would add some lights outside or inside. So this is a little bit more complex than a single object rendering. Also because the scene is going to be more complex and you will have like architecture. You would want to add some trees and vegetation, people, cars, and something that is gonna like liven up the scene, is gonna make it more realistic. And in that case, the software that I will suggest you will be the Lumion software, which is excellent for rendering and animation, and also because it has a huge library of trees and vegetation, people, animated animals, and you can simulate like snow and rain in a really easy way. Also, one other software which is pretty similar is Twinmotion, but it's a little bit cheaper. It costs a little bit less, and it has fewer objects in the libraries, but it's also a good choice if you want to do this type of representation. And if you have a standard computer, if you don't have like I don't know, $10,000 machine, these are the best software because they're pretty lightweight. They don't demand like high performance. You can do basically some nice animation and rendering without suffering too much if you have a standard personal computer. And then we have interiors, rendering of interiors. So interior renderings are, I think, the most complex. Why? Because we have a combination of different lighting. So you have the external lighting coming from outside into the room, and sometimes it's not too much, so you need to fix a little bit the exposure inside, and also you need to add some artificial lights and some like fake lights that are gonna create more brightness inside the interior. And what else? Well, interiors are not simpler than exteriors just because they are smaller, but you see here they have a lot of props. They have like tissues and carpets and paintings and things that are, again, well, you have plants inside. You can add people, so everything that's gonna make it again more realistic. So I don't think there is much difference of the complexity between an exterior rendering and an interior rendering, because they are, you know, they are pretty heavy, both scenes. And in interiors, you have like more lighting elements. So if you want to create a natural light, you will only use sun and sky coming from outside. But if you want to add more lights or lighting effects, you will probably add like spotlights and IS lights and so on. So they could be really complex. So I think that rendering an object is the easiest type of rendering. And then you have exterior, and then you have interiors. Now for the interiors, in my opinion, this is my choice, my let's say software that I prefer, my weapon of choice is gonna be the V-Ray render. And this comes with Rhino and with SketchUp and with other software as a plugin. So you can use it in many software, and it's excellent. Well, the balance between quality and performance, it's pretty good. So I think you should give it a try. Now, similar one, it's Corona Render. It's simpler than V-Ray, and well, that's it. It's simpler and cheaper. And you also have similar render engine like Arnold Render. And don't forget Unreal Engine and Unity, which they also come with powerful render engine. Now, also in V-Ray, you have libraries to populate your scene with props like plants or people and so on. And this library is called Chaos Group Cosmos. Now, if you want to know more about this other software, you can search it in our channel. You will find video courses about V-Ray, about Lumion, about all those software. Now, let's begin with the object rendering. Now, in this case, we already talked about everything we need to know about the HDRI, how to set up an HDRI. So check the lesson talking about HDRIs and all that stuff. And well, this can be applied even for more complex objects like cars, automotive design, and things like that. So what we need to create a object rendering is just an HDRI. We don't really need lights, but we can also add some lights. We need to have shadow catcher just to catch the shadows on the floor, and that's it. We don't need basically anything else. As I said, this is the easiest way we can render an object. Now, what we can do to increase the power of the, or I don't know, the, let's say, effects on the render. Well, we have two types of render engines at the moment in Blender. The first one is the oldest, and it's called Eevee, and it's pretty simple. And then we have Cycles, which is a little more accurate. Now, in some cases, you don't even need to go into Cycles because it's also heavier. So let's see something about Eevee first. So first thing, the sampling. Now, every time you see sampling somewhere, well, that's basically real simple. If you increase the samples, you will get more quality. So you need to figure out which one is the best balance for you. Now, you can see here that you can set the unlimited sampling here if you set 0 in the viewport. And we can also apply a nice denoising in the viewport. Now remember that what you see here is just a preview again, which is not really accurate. To run the render, even if you use Eevee, you need to go here and render the image from here or press F12 on the keyboard. So we can add some effects here, we can only preview them, and you will not see the most advanced effects. Now, ambient occlusion, this is another really important setting. Now, some of these settings you will find that also in Cycles, so they share some of these parameters for the renderings. So ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is that really fine shadow, really blurred shadow that is gonna appear where the lights cannot really hit directly the object. So it's kind of a occluded part of the object or cavities. So where the light has difficulties to reach the surface, that's where you will find ambient occlusion. Bloom effect. Now this one here, we can see it directly into the scene. It's kind of a glow that is gonna appear around the highlights of your render. So the part that's gonna be more in heat by light. And you can also change the intensity there and also the color of that glow. So you just need to play around a little bit and find out which one works the best. Now, well, that's basically with any parameter of render. You just need to test. You need to do a lot of renderings, a lot of tests to figure out which one works the best. We already know what depth of field is. We talked about that in the previous video. So we're gonna move forward here, and subsurface scattering, again, we already know what's that. Now, a lot of parameters here are referring to materials. So you're just deciding how accurate you want that particular effect coming from the material. So this is for subsurface scattering, and also the space reflection. You can see there, it immediately improved the reflections here. Even in the preview, we didn't run the renderings yet. We're just working on the preview. And you can also, you can see there, create more precise, more accurate effects. Motion blur, it's about animation, so we're going to talk about animation later, but basically it's the effect when you have a movement of the object and it's going to leave like a ghosting effect, so it's blurring if some object is in movement. Volumetrics, again, we talked about volumetrics, talking about lights, and here is again if we want to increase the quality or the samples, and volumetric shadows as well. Performance, hair. Well, hair, we're going to talk about this later, because you can create airs to simulate also not only airs like on characters, but also like to create carpets or the grass on an exterior rendering. Again, these are quality for the shadows. If you increase this value here, you're going to increase the quality of the shadows. This is kind of an advanced feature. Usually when you bake, you are like baking the lights and the shadows onto the object, so they are kind of becoming part of the material of the object, so you don't need to recalculate every time the render. This is a technique that is used for real-time renderings, like in Unreal Engine, Unity, but also in V-Ray. They also have like a real-time player now. So, well, we will not go into this. It's a little bit more complex. Let's go down there. Film, this is where you can get the transparent background, we already know, and then you can save as PNG and have a transparent background that you can change in Photoshop or other graphic design software. Simplify, well, you can basically simplify the rendering.